Hi, and thanks for joining me on a very special edition of Two Guys, Two Gals, and a Lot of Whiskey. And for the first time ever in 8 years, we are doing a whiskey show. The Wonderful World of Whiskey, we're going to call this. WWOW, wow. So I want to thank my guests for coming in. Matt, Whitney from Maximum Beverage. You've been on the show, and we did Oh No Merlot, I think about a year ago. I think you were on the show.
Yes. Yep.
And Vivian Grady's back, because she was such a wonderful guest from the last show. Thank Vivian, West End wine aficionado. And Sandy Holland. Everybody knows Sandy, West Hartford Wine Club. And the three of us here are sort of novices when it comes to whiskey. And Matt was generous enough and kind enough to bring in some stuff to let us explore the palatal taste of whiskey.
Yeah, I think whiskey is, kind of, as far as collecting goes, become one of the hottest things out there. What we have here today is between bourbon, Scotch, and Irish whiskey, and actually a rye, kind of covers the gamut, I think, as to what people will see out there in the marketplace. There's nothing here that's too hard to get. But what you've seen a lot of times in the whiskey industry is rarity and scarcity is the next best thing.
And are those for more of a refined palate when you start getting into those higher price points?
Yeah, I think that what's happened is there's a distillery that had old Rip Van Winkle and Pappy Van Winkle, and that distillery has created a lot of brands that for the last 20, 30 years were not very popular. But then when there was a big review that came out for Pappy Van Winkle, old Rip Van Winkle, all their other brands kind of created this. It basically became a Wall Street themed scarcity thing. So people were buying up a lot of the whiskey, and prices have gone skyrocketing. And there's just scarcity. People are willing to pay for stuff that 10 years ago you could walk in any corner store and pick it off the shelf.
What is our first one that we're going to be starting with? We're going to start off from the lighter to the little bit heavier when it comes to the alcohol content.
So we're going to start with, in generally, I think in my palate, when I'm tasting whiskey, if I'm doing any sort of tasting, I like to start with the Irish whiskeys first, because typically, they're, I'm quite a bit Irish, and the Irish people are more about volume, so they like to after they distill, they like to proof down their whiskey quite a bit more than everybody else. So you typically find a lot of the Irish whiskeys to be anywhere between 46-47% alcohol down to 40% as being the lowest by law.
And similar to wine, the aroma, wow, it really just pops right up and hits you as soon as you open that bottle up.
Yeah, so for me, with Irish whiskey, I get, because there's typically, to me, a cleaner style, because I get a lot of citrus and some kind of fruit notes really out of those, whereas you'll find as we get towards kind of the bourbons and even into the Scotch here, you're going to see more kind of like maltier caramels and things like that, and butterscotch and oak. Right.
So this is a little bit what I'm familiar with my limited experience with whiskey. It's that fire that sort of coats the inside of your mouth. But the fire is not as strong going down, I'm assuming, because it's a lower alcohol.
Yeah, I mean, this is as far as Irish whiskeys go. So this first one, Teeling small batch whiskey, straight out of Dublin. So little quick thing about Irish whiskey, up until about, my numbers aren't going to be right on, but up until about 6, 7, 8 years ago, there's really only 4 or 5 distilleries in the entire country. And so small batch whiskey, there's a revival going on in Ireland, and it started maybe 5, 6 years ago. There's a couple like small companies that are starting up, and one of them here is Teeling. And so it's kind of a nice thing. We have a lot of small batch whiskey going on here in the States, and Ireland has followed suit quickly after us.
I think you had a question earlier before the show, Vivian, about the difference between, was it the rye, the question about?
Yeah, I was wondering about rye whiskey rather than just whiskey or a Scotch whiskey.
Yeah, so like in the States, we have rules for rye. So if something's labeled a rye whiskey, it's made with 51% rye, no more than 80%. If you are looking at something like a bourbon, it's made with 51% corn, no more than 80%.
Okay.
Did I say that correctly? 51. Anyways, between 51 and 80% to get that category. Basically, it's the majority without being over the top. If you ever see anything labeled corn whiskey, it's more than 80%. It's no longer bourbon anymore. It's now called a corn whiskey if it's more than 80%.
And whiskey's all corn derived. Is that pretty much the case? Or-
There are obviously there's a lot of these do have a lot of corn in them, but not all whiskey is 100% corn derived or the majority corn derived. Some of them are weeded. You have a lot of whiskeys, in this one in particular, has a little bit of wheat in it. So are they gluten free? That's a good question. Some of them are. Some of them.
And I think we're also saying that the more corn you have, the sweeter it's going to be.
Sure, your corn is definitely sweeter than a rye mash bill or a wheat mash bill. It's definitely got a lot more sugar in it for sure.
Now, what are we going to see comparatively when we go off the Jameson?
Let's pop onto the Jameson. Obviously, everyone knows Jameson, but here we have their 12-year, their Special Reserve. That's the youngest age whiskey in the bottle. So you could have some 18 in here. You could have maybe a splash of 25. Who knows what they're doing and how they're doing it. But that is the rule. It's the youngest whiskey. And obviously, they're with Jameson. And what happened was with the whiskey boom, a lot of these guys 25 years ago didn't make enough whiskey. So you think of guys like Macallan or Glenlivet that have 25-year-old whiskeys. What we've seen is the prices from importing just go through the roof because there just wasn't that much back then.
This one actually seems a little more mild than the first one.
Yeah, so this one actually is. This is 40%, 80 proof.
So is it less alcohol? Is that why the bouquet is not as the other one was really kind of...
But you also got to remember, this is a much younger whiskey. This is finished in rum casks.
Yeah, this tastes older.
But this is probably about between 2
smell
and 4
different.
years, maybe a little younger. But this is really mellowed.
It sure is.
It's spent time in barrel.
So I have a question because
fire.
I hear Jameson and I think make me an Irish coffee.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, I personally,
You wouldn't typically use one like that
Oh
for
no,
an
this
Irish
is absolutely a sipping whiskey, 100%. This carries definitely a premium price tag. We're talking well over the $35 to $40 at a regular Jameson.
And you
gets.
don't get when I like Irish coffee at the end of my dinner, but I get a burn after I drink
Certainly.
that, and
Yep.
you definitely don't get that
This is
same
very
thing
smooth.
here.
This
Yeah.
this is sipping. I could definitely sip on this for a while. But
Yeah.
actually, the price point for the first one roughly was,
This is about $35.
and then we move up to a 12-year.
Your 12-year, I think last I checked, I think it's somewhere in the $60 to $70 range. Maybe a little bit less. Maybe in the high 50s. I'd have to double check on that one.
You know what I find interesting is, and like I said, I don't know a lot about whiskey. I do know a little bit about Scots because I actually honeymooned in Scotland, so we did do some distilleries there. This really is smooth. It has sort of like a caramelish type
Yeah.
taste on the mouth. It doesn't burn too badly. It's definitely a sipping.
Yeah, and I like it because I'm a single malt drinker.
Mm-hmm.
So the more mellow it is, just me with a side of water, and I can just sip that a little bit all night. It's not too much. It's not too strong.
It's very clean.
Very clean.
I find this about Irish whiskeys. They're very clean. They don't have they don't stray from the profile very often. You don't see a lot of variation in Ireland like you do even in Scotland where they finish things in every barrel known to man. In Ireland, they're very traditional and they always just kind of typically up until, again, recently, they've, straight kind of straight oak aging without any finishing, typically in other casks, because you see in the whiskey world a lot of people are taking sherry casks and rum casks and finishing scotch in a bourbon cask.
So I know we got the Glenlivet coming up,
Let's do that.
and then when we finish this one, we're going to talk a little about the whiskey tasting that's coming up in West Hartford for you
So,
guys.
12-year Glenlivet, one of the all-time kind of great whiskeys, or single malt scotches rather. One of the things about Scotland is they're kind of regionally specific, and you have and this is a very broad way to look at things, but you have kind of two styles. You have the Highland style, which is like this cleaner style, and then you have the Isla peaty style.
Sides.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
Space Side.
I don't like the peaties.
The Isla.
I
Yeah,
love
no?
those.
No,
Love
no.
those.
That Rocky likes the peaty ones, and
So this is really traditional, old school style Highland Scotch.
See, I like that.
Mellow on the first taste, but you definitely feel
you
it.
feel it.
A little
going
bit of
down.
a
Yeah.
bite. Yeah, that's nice.
You get
though.
some of that leather. I get like a lot of leather out of these, and you feel like when you taste something like that, you're like hanging out in your grandfather's den or something.
Yeah.
Fire going,
Yeah,
yes.
you get the charcoal
And what is the rule when you open a bottle of whiskey, or bourbon, or scotch? How long can it stay open without it deteriorating the flavor? Did anybody know the answer to that?
And what happens is, right, so there is evaporation that happens because a lot of these bottles, especially if you're getting over $30, come with a cork. And so as we know with wine, the reason you have a cork is you like that air to kind of mix in and mix through with so they'll evolve and you will have some loss. Do they go bad? No, they do not go bad. Back in the day, you could clean your wound with your whiskey.
Yeah, that's true.
How about the question of having it neat or with ice?
Yeah.
Some things I don't mind a little water going in there. I don't want my whiskey too cold. I kind of like it room temperature. Is that just personal preference, or?
I think it is. I think the quality, some need it. For me, I sometimes want a cold drink, and so I will definitely throw rocks in. There's a lot of people that are the same way every time. One ice cube, or a splash of water, or just straight neat. There's been a lot of science done with regards to water and how it interacts, and ice and how it interacts with whiskey. And they say that water, what it does is it breaks the surface tension, so it allows it to open up. It's kind of like when we sit here and we swirl our wine glass. So when you do a splash of water on the top, and if you go to a whiskey tasting event, like we often have events, even in our stores at Maximum Beverage, where we do a seminar and stuff like that, and they'll talk through that. But you can probably experience that if you come by on October 13th.
That's what we're talking about.
At the Hartford Golf Club. We're going to have the Weehaw Whiskey Festival. Be a great opportunity, I think, for anyone to explore. I think we're on track for 40 different tables.
Wow.
That's pretty impressive.
We'll have roughly 200 some odd whiskeys to try. I think at one point maybe it might get up to 250. I don't know the exact number. And it's just really a great event. Food is included in the ticket price.
And the perfect weather for whiskey, October, a little
Yep.
chill in the air.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. And
we've done cigars out in the back lawn, and so if you're a cigar smoker, cigars and whiskeys.
do you have a web page or just contact
we do.
me?
WeeHawWhiskey.com, whiskey with an E.
Can't get any easier than that.
Yeah, WeeHawWhiskey.com. And so there's a website right there. You can order right on the page. There's a Facebook page, Weehaw Whiskey. I think it's just Weehaw Whiskey. So Weehaw Whiskey Festival. Just best thing to do is Google it and stuff like that too.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
So I think it's time to the American side now.
All right, so we're heading into a special brand that's dear to our hearts at Maximum Beverage, Old School J.W. Damp. This is a wheated bourbon, 50% alcohol, so 100 proof. And
Beautiful color. That's people.
yeah, so this is super classic, old school. I mean, this is the type of bottle you will find if you have somebody that's been drinking whiskey for the last 40, 50 years. If you go into their cellar and they like to save things, you'll find something like this.
I have one of those in my cabinet.
You do, right.
I'm going to assume you turned my husband into that.
So this is about, so price point on the Glenlivet is roughly around $50. This guy is about $20, and it's a liter.
Nice.
And so when you try this, you're going to be blown away at the quality. So a couple things. This is a bottled in bond, straight bourbon whiskey. Now that's important. So bottled in bond means, I don't know if did we all dump out there?
Yes.
Yes.
And we can do a rinse if we need to, because this, if you feel that you're getting overpowered here. Bottled in bond means back in the day when, after Prohibition and everything, there's quality issues. So they use government bonded warehouses where they actually bottled the product so that people weren't putting fillers in there, and it was what they said it was. Because back in the day, again, it was tough to, we're talking, 20s, 30s, 40s, it was tough to manage all that. So quality control, right. And it's probably, one of the good things the government did back then, right? So,
Yeah, right.
so that was an important thing. And then there's an age component there. The whiskey's at least 4 years old at a bottle in bond. I believe it's 4 years old. And then obviously this is a Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. When it's straight bourbon, it's before it's proofed. It's distilled down to no more than 160 proof. So that's 80% alcohol.
Very smooth. Took a sip. Delicious.
Right.
I feel like it's going to put a little hair on my chest. I'm not
It
going to
does.
lie.
And I have hair on my chest. It
You're
might
in
grow a little
trouble.
bit more. But it does have that little fiery kick.
Yeah,
but it's still
absolutely.
smooth. It still has a very
It's shorter though. That
very
fiery-
short.
Yeah, it's short. So how would you describe the American whiskeys to whiskeys? Like, how do they compare?
So
It's kind of like comparing, the French wines to the American wines. What would you say?
yeah, so there's obviously our industry here is, as far as the quality levels and all that, it's newer. But if you're looking to find whiskeys that are 20, 25 years old, they're going to fetch similar price points to what scotches that are 25, 30 years old would fetch.
Okay.
So as far as they're perceived in the world, I mean, they're highly regarded. Obviously, our focus here is bourbon, and bourbon is kind of a brash product in a sense. It's kind of in your face. It's very American. And the quality levels from the high-end guys that have been producing for a while. Granted, there's a lot of small distilleries. The problem with whiskey is you have to age it to make good quality. You can't. It's not like wine
Yeah,
where you could grow some vineyards in a couple of years, or you could even source some stuff and make some great wine. With this, you got to have it. After you get the right mash and you have the right distillation process, then you need to age that thing for at least 10 years to reach a level of quality that would be, considered really good.
So what's an average batch when you say, this is the year 2018, and
Yeah.
you see how much do you
It
make
depends.
on average?
It depends on a distillery. There's a couple massive distilleries that produce a bunch of different brands in a lot of different ways, and they'll do thousands and thousands of barrels every year.
But it's very different to wine, where if you didn't yield a lot of grapes,
Sure.
you're going to have something smaller, right? So when you're making whiskey, you're getting your mash from someone, you're putting your recipe together, right?
Yes, you create a recipe, and the distillation process, I will say, I am not as familiar with as the consuming process. That's my forte. But as far as distillation goes, I mean, the corn, what do we call it? The harvest.
Oh, the harvest.
That's a very difficult word for me. The corn harvest is pretty similar every year, right?
Yeah.
And you got to remember, you're heating this thing
not
up.
gonna vary.
Right, and you're heating this up to very high temperatures when you're distilling it, and so you're kind of cooking it, right? And same like beer, it's not really a lot of variation. It's not like wine where that whole process is very organic and
Right, or if
within.
you have a freeze and then
Sure,
before
sure.
you've collected your grapes, then you have another issue, unless it's ice wine.
Yeah. then
And
you
we don't
want
have
it
a
to-
corn
yeah.
shortage in the United
That's
States.
true.
Yeah.
I love the title of our next one, Whistle Pig.
Yeah, Whistle Pig. So this is interesting, right? So we talked about how the older guys are really producing the best whiskey because they've been able to do it over time, right? And so these smaller distilleries that are coming out kind of struggle with that. But you have these guys are out of Shoreham, Vermont. So it's about as local as whiskey gets for us here in Connecticut. This is a rye, a straight rye whiskey, which means, again, we're 51% rye or more. It's a 10-year age whiskey. And it is one of the first ones actually bottled at the Whistle Pig farm. Now, they do source this whiskey. So they source this actually from a company up in Canada. But again, they would never be able to create this quality.
And
So
the price point roughly about this is?
this is expensive. This is about $70.
And then we're getting up to the really higher end
Yep.
for whiskey aficionados.
And ryes typically at this age are going to be a little more expensive than your typical bourbon, and really that comes more to the
like
fact
this.
of they don't produce as many of them.
I
There's
haven't
just not as
tasted it
many.
yet, but I like the
So
aromas
this
in
is
that
this is a very high alcohol, and again, so we're getting into now single barrel, where they've taken a single barrel out of a warehouse and they bottled that barrel by itself. Whereas a lot of these, like this, they take a bunch and they make basically a mix. So it's kind of like a single estate wine, or when you're looking at a specific vineyard, that's sort of kind of what we're getting here. We're getting that specific kind of location in the warehouse. And we bought this barrel. This is our second batch that we bought the entire barrel at Maximum Beverage. They bottle it for us. We get to pick. They send us like 5 or 6 samples. We taste the one we like, and they bottle it, and they send it out to us.
So
That's
these
awesome.
are oak barrels,
Oak barrels. Yep.
right? And would this be a brand new oak barrel?
Brand new
or-
American oak. Again,
Okay, so we're not mixing flavors from
Nope.
whatever's left over
Yes,
from last year. Okay.
exactly. Yeah. So there are some that will do some other spirit companies like tequila. What they do is they age in ex-bourbon barrels. So use bourbon barrels. Here with bourbon, you need new American oak. that's how you get that kind of rich flavor. Those sugars
Yeah,
come out of the
this is a
wood.
tempered fire. It's there, but it's more tempered.
What's surprising is I don't get that when like the other ones, when I smell them, it hits me. This seems very mild, and then
Yep.
you taste it, and it
It's a little caramelly.
jumps.
Got a lot of
in.
caramel for sure.
Yeah.
It's definitely got that kind of, it's definitely rye, right? You definitely notice a difference between that
Oh, yeah,
and
yeah.
the flavor profile and how it's got that kind of complexity. There's tons of different flavors going on in
The
there.
bouquet is completely different.
Sure
too.
is.
Yeah.
And again, these bottles could have been open for the last 6 months. So we pulled these out of the stash, so to speak.
So as far as popularity, are rye whiskeys again? Is that just like personal choice? Is it popular or?
It definitely is personal choice, and some people don't like ryes. They're not everyone produces a rye, and it's definitely, I think, harder to get right
Is it so?
for a
It's
distillery,
more specific.
for sure.
So
Yep.
it's a bigger risk.
Yeah, it's a bigger risk, and they don't sell like regular bourbons do. They cost more to make, and they end up being more expensive, which is why this rye has a 10 years. It's not cheap. $70 is not.
This is something unique then.
Yep.
If you want something different.
Yeah, I mean, I love ryes. I like having a nice selection of stuff, but ryes are definitely have a place, and they make great. I mean, when you're talking about cocktails, you typically aren't going to blend the Whistle Pig, but if you wanted to make a nice Manhattan or something with that rye, that'd be delicious. Got to find the right vermouth, though.
Now, the Knob Creek I am familiar with, though I have not tasted. That is pretty popular now, too, isn't it? The Knob?
Knob Creek is popular. This, again, is another single barrel that we did. So this was barrel number 3688, hand-selected by Maximum Beverage. So we have 120 proof. So it's a single barrel, proofed. We're getting pretty close to barrel proof, right? When they pull these things out of the barrel, they're really, really darn close to being about 120 proof. So
Wow, this is the most potent one then of the night.
Yes.
so they haven't, right, so we were at 119 there, 119.6, and now we're right up at 120, and this is kind of a, again, thing they do, a house style
What
thing.
makes the proof go up and up?
Well, it's sitting in it's sitting obviously in a barrel in a barn, and oxygen is absorbing. We call it the angel's share. Is all that whiskey that used to be in that barrel that's now gone to the angels. That's the angel's share.
Okay.
So the older a whiskey is, the more loss you have.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, it's kind of like dry aged meat. When they dry age that meat, they got to cut they have a lot of loss. It's the same thing. The longer you age it, the more you lose. So what they do typically with a lot of these is they'll add water to proof it down to, if you're looking for a house style. So that's what they'll do in Knob Creek. They'll add a little bit of water, but not much. And then if you see barrel proof, that comes straight out of the barrel. That's like putting your head underneath the barrel and turning on the faucet.
This is a sipper, though. This is kind of a very slow
I
sipper.
like the flavor a lot, though, and I
probably would put a rock in
kind of
this.
shocked
This
that
would
I'm
be
saying
nice for
that.
dessert.
It's
I like this with an ice cube or two, for
Yeah,
sure.
I think so.
And personally, and this is a little less expensive than the Whistle Pig Rye. I prefer the Whistle Pig Rye. They're both similar age. We got a 9-year here. This is a 10-year.
This is heavier.
It's definitely
me.
got some.
This is
Some
like
pop
what
to
you'd
it.
have maybe after you had a little slice of pecan pie.
Ooh,
Sure, I love
That's
it.
what I'm thinking.
it's a good idea since
I
we're
love
going
bourbon.
into fall,
Bourbon and
right?
whiskeys are great with dessert. That's
Yeah.
the perfect way to do things.
Well, we still have a few minutes of the show, and of course, this still is a wine show. So I would be amiss if I did not bring in a wine that was whiskey related. This is the Apothic Inferno. It is aged in whiskey caskets. Relatively new. It's been out a little bit, hasn't it? Matt?
Yeah, they're a little later to the game. I think that one's been out about a year or two. Maybe this might be the second year they've done it.
So we have just a few minutes to taste this. I think this is a 2016 vintage, and you're going to get a slight infusement of the whiskey casket, supposedly in this. This is my first tasting. I've never had this before. So I know Matt's probably had this before.
I haven't had this one. I've had there's
You smell it.
There's a lot of the
You smell
large brands like Apothic and off the top of my head, I can't think of any right now, but there's about 5 or 6 of them that have really jumped on this. I want to call it a bandwagon, so to speak, because they sell like crazy. This is like how Americans love this stuff, right?
Yeah.
They love bourbon, how it's like aggressive like this. This is going to be a very aggressive, fruity, then smoky.
It is fruity. It's an American red, of course, but it is fruity.
Very ruby red. I like it.
And now we've tasted all this whiskey, so we don't get the smoke you
No.
typically would.
And this is like in the $17, $18, $19 range, I believe,
No, that's
around that
nice.
point.
Got a
Yeah, but
caramel
is it
flavor.
is that much? About 15 maybe?
Maybe 15. It depends on where you
Oh,
buy
yeah,
it.
I guess yeah,
I
sure.
bought this down in Milford. I think it was $17.99.
Okay.
But I think up here it might be a little cheaper.
Yeah, they do catch more if so you look at the Apothic Red, which is like 10, 11 bucks. You know, that's always going to fetch more because they're costing more to make it.
But if you're a real novice to whiskey and you want to at least still stick to wine and try a little wine that might have a little whiskey flavor, try something like this, then move up to this. I got to be honest with you, I sort of like the flavors of pretty much everything, though I like the darker colored whiskeys, bourbons. We got whiskeys as we moved up the table
Sure.
tonight.
Yeah, they were delicious.
I think, and I'll just throw this one in there. When you're looking at, I like to drink cocktails myself, and I don't always like them neat. You're looking for something that's just going to bring you bang for the buck. I mean, $20 for a liter of that is outrageous.
And that's going to last a while.
Lasts you a while. You can make a lot of, again, if you want to make a straight bourbon Manhattan, there you go.
Well, Matt, I want to thank you for coming on the show and bringing a great selection of whiskeys tonight. I think I've learned a lot. Vivian, I want to thank you for coming down again. And you're always welcome. And Sandy, I'm sorry Rocky couldn't join us, but I'm sure you're going to have a lot to talk about when you get home tonight.
Yeah, now that I can tell him I've had whiskey. We have something to talk about.
Yeah, I thought you said you weren't going to try anything. You were just going to drink the wine at the end.
I thought so. I actually enjoyed them.
Yeah, it's all a great learning experience. So once again, thank everybody for coming on the show. You'll be seeing the show in October. Check Matt's event out. We'll have that up online. And once again, Matt, you can find the information on the event in
WeHaWhiskey.com with an E. Whiskey, K-E, K-E-Y.
And always check out West Hartford Wine Club. And until next time, keep 2 guys, 2 gals, and a whole lot of whiskey in your house.